The Tampa Bay Buccaneers lose to the Washington Commanders 23-20. We all know in Tampa Bay what 13 stands for. That's Mike Evans. But in this loss, 13 stands for what Jaden Daniels represents, 13th rookie in NFL history to win a playoff game. And he goes on the road and pulls it off in prime time. The Bucs completely defeated in prime time. And going back to last year, they only have one win, and that was the victory against the Eagles. I believe at this point they're 1-7 in prime time the last couple of seasons. Just a house of horrors when they play in these spots. First, let's talk about the game, and maybe the biggest surprise was how ineffective the offense was. And I don't know how to necessarily get this point across, because Baker Mayfield was 15 of 18, threw for 185 yards. 2 touchdowns. QB rating was fantastic, but the offense only had 284 yards, and part of that has to do with the fact that the Commanders held the ball for 11 more minutes than the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So the fact that the Bucs could only generate 284 yards of offense, the fact that only 2 wide receivers for Tampa Bay had catches in this game, Mike Evans with 7 and Jalen McMillan with 2, that's a problem for one of the best offenses in the league. They could not really generate enough on the ground. They got it going in the second half, but it was the second half where they shot themselves in the foot, and they couldn't really lean on the running game like they wanted to, because Washington held the Buccaneers to 4 yards per carry, and this was one of the worst rushing defenses, yards per carry against, in the NFL entering this contest. So let's talk about the 2 monster mistakes, which are a big reason why the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are heading home early in the playoffs. One, with the team leading, and after getting a 4th down stop on a jet sweep, Baker Mayfield cannot hand the ball off correctly to Jalen McMillan. It lands on the grass. Bobby Wagner scoops it up. And that's the thing about this jet sweep. That is a day 1 install. That is something these players do in their sleep. So the fact that they messed that up, which led to a Commanders touchdown, put the Commanders up 20-17, is a big, big problem. Then, when the Buccaneers go all the way down the field, it looked like the Commanders were not going to stop the Bucs offense as long as they had the ball. They just needed to get the ball. On 3rd and inches, Graham Barton snaps the ball too soon. No one moves, and ultimately Bucky Irving takes such a loss that Todd Bowles has to kick a field goal. 2 huge execution errors, and that's part of the reason why the Buccaneers went home early. The toughest opponent in 2024 were the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and that's why this team was a constant roller coaster. They were the only team entering the playoffs that was top 5 in offense and, I should say, passing and rushing. All right? That was a stellar offensive unit, even without Chris Godwin in the fold. And the defense just... they did enough. They held the Commanders to 23 points. They bled yards. They bled minutes. All that is part of the picture. But if you told me before this game that the defense was going to hold the Commanders to 23 points, I would have said that's probably good enough for what the Buccaneers offense should do. So there's a lot of chatter on who to blame, and I think ultimately fairly a team effort. I don't think the offense performed like they should have in this contest, and the defense probably did what we all expected them to do. They had a couple of big 4th down stops, but ultimately there's only so much they can do, even with the return of Antoine Winfield Jr. Jamel Dean went out. When Dean went out, Josh Hayes came in. Josh Hayes was a part of that 4th down play that put the Commanders up 20-17 because Terry McLaurin got that touchdown in the back of the end zone. So there was just a lot going into this contest, a lot they would have had to overcome to reach a Super Bowl, but this team was certainly good enough to get to the next round, to get to Philly, and it will be a big what-if moving into the offseason. So what does the offseason, and also let me say this, Mike Evans, 792, a tutty. Marshawn Lattimore looked awful against him, so much so that the Commanders had to change their second half plan, remove him away from Mike Evans. Evans completely won that matchup. Okay, so what does the offseason look like? Well, there are a handful of guys entering the offseason who are now free agents. The picture is actually okay. The Buccaneers are in a decent cap spot, But guys that you need to keep an eye on, Chris Godwin, who I would predict will return to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Levante David, is he going to return for another season? The guy's going to be turning 35. Ben Bredesen, Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, Anthony Nelson, Greg Gaines, and then you kind of get into some depth pieces with, KJ Britt, Robert Hainsey, Shaq Barrett, Sterling Shepard, Mike Edwards, backup quarterback Kyle Trask. On paper, they got a lot returning. I mean, there are some big names here, obviously, not taking anything away from the people that I talked about, but, entering the offseason, typically, it's always a shuffle. The Bucs are in a decent spot, bringing back a lot of people, one of the youngest teams in the NFL this year, guys who had a lot of success between Barton, between Tyke Smith. Hopefully Braswell can show better performance here in year 2 versus year 1 as he was kind of learning through it. You also talk about Bucky Irving, him becoming more of the bell cow entering the end of the season. So a lot of rookies, a lot of second-year players have really earned a lot of playing time on this team. You hope you have better injury fortune moving forward. And then you have to ask, what will Jason Light and company do about maybe a Jamel Dean? They showed last year that they were willing to trade Carlton Davis because he could not consistently stay on the field. And then when you see Jamel Dean get injured in the middle of the year, go on IR, come back, get injured again, come back in the playoffs, get injured again, it goes to ask, what are you going to do with that? But also, I don't know who else to have at cornerback, considering it really is just Dean and Zion McCollum right now. So a lot of questions in this offseason. Most notably, A, is Liam Cohen returning? Is he going to take a head coaching job somewhere else? B, Mike Greenberg and John Spytek, some really, really good dudes in the front office. These guys are going to be highly coveted moving forward as teams are trying to get new people for those GM positions. Will they be heading elsewhere? But ultimately, and I said this at the beginning of the year, and I can roll back the tape if I can find it. I thought this was a playoff team. I thought this was a team that can push for an NFC championship game. But the one thing that they need to fix entering next season is they need to get a dominant edge guy who can win consistently one-on-one. Yaya Diaby came on real strong at the end of the season. I think on a Super Bowl winning team, Yaya Diaby as your number 2 sounds pretty good. I would love for the Buccaneers to use some cap space and get someone like a Max Crosby and trade what you got to trade. Because next year, I think that's the window. I think this Buccaneers team, if you can keep Liam Cohen, if you can keep Todd Bowles in that spot one more year, with what they got returning, with who they got on this team, and hopefully having some health fortune versus this year where they were all banged up, I truly believe the Buccaneers are a Super Bowl caliber team entering next year, but they do have to invest heavily in the draft on defense, and they have to invest heavily at the linebacker position, and they do have to make a big move to bring in someone that can get some pressure on the edge and really suck up some more gravity on the line. Because if you go back to that Super Bowl winning team, they had a Shaq Barrett out there who was crushing opponents, and then you had Sue and Vea, and you can really start lining up some people, and you can't block them all. Right now, what Cansey and Vea do in the trenches, what they done, amazing. I mean, they racked up a ton of sacks. Bowles' game plan to kind of just suck them all on the inside and allow Vea and Cansey to really do their dirty work. They were phenomenal. Vea, phenomenal all year. He came back this season in great shape. Hopefully he continues that, comes back in a similar fashion, because what we saw from him this year was extraordinary. But this team is not far off, and I want to give them a lot of credit, because I think a lot of teams in their spot with the injuries and hitting that midseason lull and losing twice to Atlanta and having the tough losses that they had in primetime, I think some other teams might have folded. I think some other teams might have said, you know what, this is not our year. These guys fight. They always fight. The effort's never a problem. And with Baker Mayfield always bringing you into the fight, you always have a chance. But certainly there are some things that the team can improve upon moving forward. It's a bitter pill to swallow to be talking about the offseason so quickly. Definitely thought this team had a longer run in them. But alas, Their year ends at home against the Washington Commanders, losing 23-20.